In this episode, we're going to make security measurement feel less mysterious and a lot more useful by focusing on two metric families that show up constantly in real security leadership conversations: KPI and KRI. If you are new to cybersecurity, it can feel like metrics are just numbers that get stuffed into reports, but the goal is much simpler than that. A good metric is a small, repeatable signal that helps you understand whether security is getting better or worse, and whether the organization is becoming safer or more exposed. The trick is that not all numbers are meaningful, and the most tempting numbers are often the least helpful. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to look at a security situation and propose a few clear metrics that represent performance and exposure without drowning anyone in data. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A key performance indicator, KPI, is a measurement that tells you how well a process or activity is performing, usually compared to a target or expectation. Think of it as a speedometer or a dashboard gauge for something the security program is trying to do reliably, like responding to alerts, patching important systems, or completing security reviews on time. A KPI is usually connected to actions you can take directly because it describes how your work is going, not just what the world is doing to you. It can be leading or lagging, meaning it can either help you predict future outcomes or summarize outcomes that already happened. A KPI is not automatically good just because it is easy to count. It is good when it describes progress toward a goal that matters to reducing harm. A key risk indicator, KRI, is a measurement that helps you understand exposure, meaning the level of risk the organization is carrying at a point in time. If a KPI is about how well your security engine is running, a KRI is more like a weather forecast that signals conditions that could lead to trouble. A KRI is usually connected to risk drivers like unpatched critical vulnerabilities, high-privilege accounts that are not controlled well, weak third-party security posture, or a growing number of systems you cannot properly inventory. You may not fully control these conditions, especially when they depend on business choices, legacy technology, or external threats. That does not make the metric useless. It makes it valuable because it points to areas where leadership choices and trade-offs are increasing or decreasing exposure. Beginners often mix these up because the words performance and risk feel like they should overlap, and sometimes they do. Here is a simple way to separate them. KPI tells you how well a security activity is executing, and KRI tells you how much danger or uncertainty the organization is living with. For example, the time it takes to apply high-priority patches after they are approved is a KPI because it measures operational execution. The number of critical vulnerabilities that remain unpatched beyond an agreed time window is a KRI because it measures ongoing exposure. The first measurement can improve even while the second measurement remains high if the organization has a huge backlog, which shows why keeping both views matters. If you only track performance, you might celebrate doing work faster without noticing that the risk pile is still growing. A strong metric, whether KPI or KRI, should be easy to explain, hard to misinterpret, and tied to a real decision. A good test is to ask what you would do differently if the number changes, because if the answer is nothing, the metric is probably noise. Another test is whether different people would interpret it the same way, because metrics that require long explanations tend to fail in practice. The best metrics also have a stable definition that does not change every time someone wants a better-looking trend. You can still refine metrics over time, but the point is to build trust that the numbers represent reality rather than politics. A metric that is accurate but constantly redefined ends up being treated like a story, not a signal. It also helps to think about metric quality in terms of behavior, because every metric creates incentives. If you measure something, people will try to improve it, and sometimes they will improve the number instead of the outcome. For instance, if you measure how many incidents are closed per week, teams may close tickets quickly by downgrading severity or marking items as resolved without fully fixing root causes. That metric might show improved performance while actual exposure rises, which is the opposite of what you want. The better approach is to choose metrics that reward the behavior you actually want, such as reducing repeat incidents, shortening the time systems remain exposed, or increasing the percentage of critical assets that meet baseline security expectations. Metrics are not just reporting tools, they are steering tools, and steering tools need to be selected with care. To build meaningful KPI metrics, start with the security processes you expect to run repeatedly and reliably. A beginner-friendly way to see this is to imagine a few common security workflows: detecting suspicious activity, analyzing it, deciding whether it is an incident, containing it, and recovering. You can measure performance at each step using time-based metrics, quality-based metrics, and completion-based metrics. Examples include average time to acknowledge an alert, percentage of alerts triaged within a target window, or percentage of incidents with a completed after-action review. These are KPI metrics because they tell you whether security operations are functioning as intended. They also help you spot bottlenecks, such as slow handoffs, unclear ownership, or missing information that delays decisions. To build meaningful KRI metrics, start with the conditions that make harm more likely or impact more severe. Exposure often grows when you do not know what you have, when you cannot control access well, when you cannot update systems quickly, or when critical data flows are not protected. So a KRI might track the percentage of critical assets missing an owner, the number of systems with unsupported software, or the percentage of privileged accounts not using strong authentication. These are risk indicators because they describe a posture that increases the chance of compromise or increases the damage if compromise happens. Even without deep technical knowledge, you can understand the logic. Unknown assets cannot be protected, weak access control invites misuse, and outdated systems carry known weaknesses. A KRI does not need to predict the exact next attack. It needs to describe whether the organization is trending towards safer or more exposed conditions. One of the most useful beginner skills is learning to anchor metrics to assets that matter. Not everything in an organization is equally important, and metrics that treat all systems the same tend to mislead. If you measure patching performance across every device equally, you can hide poor performance on critical systems behind good performance on low-impact systems. A better pattern is to segment by criticality, such as crown jewel systems, systems that store sensitive data, or systems that support essential business functions. Then your KPI and KRI metrics become sharper because they describe reality where it matters most. This also helps leadership understand why security is asking for attention, because you are connecting work and exposure to the parts of the business that keep the lights on. Another key idea is choosing leading versus lagging metrics intentionally. Lagging metrics describe outcomes that have already happened, like the number of incidents last quarter or the total cost of security events. Those can be useful, but they do not help you steer in real time. Leading metrics describe conditions that tend to cause outcomes, like increasing phishing click rates, growing patch backlog for critical systems, or rising exceptions to access policies. Many KRI metrics are leading because they point to risk before a major incident occurs. Many KPI metrics can be leading too, especially when they describe whether key protective routines are being executed on schedule. A healthy metric set usually includes both so you can understand what happened and also what is likely to happen next if nothing changes. It is also important to recognize that some metrics are naturally imperfect, and that does not make them useless. Security is messy because you are measuring human behavior, technology complexity, and adversarial activity all at once. For example, measuring the number of vulnerabilities might not reflect true risk if you do not consider exploitability, exposure, and asset criticality. Measuring the number of security events might reflect better detection rather than worse security, because improved monitoring can make the numbers go up even while risk goes down. The solution is not to give up on metrics, but to add context and pair metrics so you can interpret them correctly. This is why KPI and KRI are often used together, because performance metrics explain whether you are improving your ability to manage exposure, and exposure metrics explain why performance improvements matter. A practical way to avoid confusion is to build metric pairs that tell a combined story without turning into a narrative. For example, pair AKP, I like time to remediate critical vulnerabilities on critical assets with AK, or I like the count of critical vulnerabilities past the target window on those same assets. The first tells you whether your process is moving quickly enough, and the second tells you whether the organization is still carrying dangerous exposure. If the KPI improves but the KRI remains high, you have learned something important. The pace is better, but the backlog is too large, or new issues are arriving faster than you can fix them. If the KRI drops but the KPI gets worse, you might have had a temporary lull in new findings while operations are actually weakening. Pairing metrics helps you avoid false confidence and helps you explain what is happening without resorting to vague claims. Finally, remember that a metric should reflect security performance and exposure, not just activity. Counting activity is seductive because it is easy, but activity is not the same as improvement. For example, counting how many training sessions were delivered is activity, but measuring how often people fall for simulated phishing attempts is closer to exposure, and measuring how quickly the organization fixes the root causes of repeat phishing incidents is closer to performance. Similarly, counting how many scans were run is activity, but measuring how quickly high-risk findings are resolved and how long critical systems remain exposed is performance and risk. The goal is not to build a museum of numbers. It is to create a small set of indicators that help you notice problems early, prioritize intelligently, and show whether the security program is truly reducing exposure over time. When you put this all together, you can think of KPI metrics as the dials that show how well security work is executed, and KRI metrics as the warning lights that show how exposed the organization is. A beginner does not need to memorize a giant catalog of metrics to do this well. You need to understand what each metric is trying to signal and whether it supports a decision. Strong KPI metrics focus on timeliness, completeness, and quality of key security processes, while strong KRI metrics focus on the conditions that increase the likelihood or impact of harm. If you can explain the difference in plain language, choose a few metrics tied to critical assets, and anticipate how the numbers could be misread or gamed, you are already doing the core thinking that security leaders expect. The real power of metrics is that they turn security from a vague feeling into something you can steer, and that is how performance and exposure become visible enough to improve.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.